I'm Dr. Musil, and in this video we'll be reviewing standard form claims and how to translate anything that's said into a standard form claim. As the editors of our textbook pointed out, practically anything that's said can be translated into one of these four standard form claims. So the first thing you want to note with regard to these standard form claims is that they have to map up, what you're translating has to map up perfectly into one of these forms. So you can't have any other words thrown in here. They have to be exactly what's here. You can put almost any kind of noun or noun phrase into one of these blanks, but you can't have any additional words anywhere. It's got to exactly match one of these four forms. So kind of along with what I was saying there for a second, what you put into these, they're called terms, and they need to be nouns or noun phrases, meaning one of the examples I think in the practice exercises was, all snakes are, or some snakes are not poisonous. Poisonous won't work. You need to turn it into, when you're translating it, into poisonous snakes, not just poisonous. So it would be something like, some snakes are not poisonous snakes. You can't just have an adjective. It's got to be a noun or noun phrase. The other kind of tricky thing about the terms, they designate classes, meaning, or categories, meaning that it can't just be one thing. It has to be plural, right? There has to be more than one. So that gets tricky when you're dealing with an expression that seems to involve one time or one person. And so you'll recall in the reading where they discussed Aristotle, you have to turn it into a weird sounding class of Aristotles. All people identical with Aristotle are cool people or something like that. So it can get a little tricky, but if you just remember these four basic forms and remember in your mind that you have to map up whatever you're trying to translate into one of these precise forms, then you should be okay. So we talked about nouns and noun phrases, right? You can't have just an adjective for a term here. It's got to be a noun or noun phrase. The other thing I want to mention real quick before getting into some examples is that two of these are called affirmative or inclusive claims, and two of them are referred to as negative or exclusive claims. And that's just because of how they're worded, right? The A and the I are including, right? They're inclusive. They're known as being affirmative claims. You're saying something positive about, the predicate in terms of the subject. So you're including on these two, whereas the E and the O are referred to as negative claims because you're excluding, right? No cool people are philosophers, right? You're excluding philosophers from the category of cool people. So hopefully that makes sense, and that will be important too in terms of some of the things we say later on in the chapter, right? When we discuss things like the rules of the rules method for testing for the validity of a categorical syllogism. You'll need to remember which ones are positive and which ones are negative claims. Okay, so that's important. Other than that, again, it's just a matter, and a lot of things in logic are like this. It's just a matter of practice, especially when it comes to some of those quirky examples where you're dealing with one person or a place or a time. You just got to kind of get used to translating some of these. So I thought I'd go ahead and just go over some examples. This one is actually 8.2, number 3. And I included this in the supplemental exercises that I've included the answers for. But I like this one for an example. If you live in the dorms, you can't own a car. Okay. Notice the negative here, right? You cannot own a car. So that's a tip to us that it's going to be an E claim, right? So it's going to be something like, no people who live in the dorms are people who can own a car. So notice how we have matched the E claim, standard E form perfectly here. No blank are blank. Now we have a rather long and seemingly awkward term, right, or phrase, but that's fine as long as it maps up to something up here. So this is a category, and so is this, right? People who live in the dorms, people who can own a car. Okay? So again, this example in an if-then statement where you're dealing with the negative and the consequent. The antecedent is the first part of the if-then statement, and the consequent is the second part of an if-then statement. When it's negative, like cannot, it's usually going to be translated into an E form. But if you have and again, these are called conditionals, an if-then statement where it's not negative in the consequent, but if it's positive, then you're probably going to translate it to an A form. So here's another example. This isn't A2 anymore. It's just one I came up with. If you live in the dorms, then you are really, really cool. Okay. Pretty similar, except here again, we're not dealing with the negative in the consequent of the conditional. It's positive. So instead of an E form, we're going to be using an A form. This would be all people who live in the dorms are really, really cool people. Now again, notice how we're matching up perfectly in terms of that A form here. Okay? So that's another example. Another quick example. On a few occasions, oops, I think there's only one S there. I've almost died from the stench when I've visited Henry's house. Here we have a seemingly convoluted statement, but again, it can be translated into a standard form claim. It would be something like this. Sometimes I've visited Henry's house are times I've almost died. Sorry about the handwriting here. From the stench. So again, this is all one, and then here's our second term, and it matches up perfectly with the I form. Okay. A couple more quick examples here. A few of his band's songs sounded terrible. So this would be translated again into an I claim, right? It would be something like some songs of his band or songs his band's played. You can always kind of tweak them a little bit as long as they map up to the basic form. So here again we have a basic I form claim. Okay. Maps up to the I up here. A couple more. All of Tom Brady's throws this season were excellent. Okay. Be something like, this is going to be all. When you're dealing with all, that's a pretty good indicator that it's probably going to be an A form, right? So we're going to use an A form. All throws Tom Brady made this season are, and you got to keep it in the present tense. That's another thing that they did a good job talking about in the textbook. Are throws that were excellent. Okay, so here again, this is how it'll break down. So this is the original statement or sentence, and to get it into a standard form A claim, you would just tweak it a little bit. Have to keep it in present tense, are, but otherwise, you manipulate it a little bit, and it's after a good amount of practice. Like I said, you should be fairly confident in your ability to translate almost anything that's said into standard form. Let's do one last one here. You never cleaned up after yourself when you lived in your mother's basement. So here we get something negative sounding, right? Never. So right off the bat, I'm thinking either E or O. And this one, it's not just one or a couple times, right? It's indicating it never. It was never the case. So it's probably going to be an E claim. So we'll translate something like this. No times you lived in your mother's basement are times you cleaned up after yourself. So again, maps up to the E form here. No times you lived in your mother's basement. That's the first term, right? First class or category of times in this case are times you cleaned up after yourself. Another category or class of times. Okay, so hopefully you found this video helpful. Again, practice, 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 and if you find yourself struggling initially, hopefully that practice will help you feel more confident and like you're able to eventually easily translate seemingly anything that someone says into one of these standard form claims. Thank you.